Being a comic book critic myself, I can tell you, sometimes it's no fun. Sometimes you have to give a comic book, whether you wanted to like it or not, a bad review, and you really have to be honest. They are for comic book readers, and that is who the audience is. And if it's a good review, I want to let you know exactly why it's good, and if you're hesitant, why you need to go check it out. If it's bad, I want to let you know before you go waste your money on something and kind of explain to you exactly what I think didn't work. And if that doesn't bother you, go check it out anyway. Perhaps it was the comic book for you, and you and I just happen to disagree on the quality of that book. But first and foremost, my reviews are a public service. I am not here to kiss anyone in the industry's ass. I'm actually not here really to shit on anybody. When I have nice things to say, I'll say nice things. When I have negative things to say, I will say them. And I'm not really worried about any type of reprisals from the comic book industry. Now, there are some people out there that are worried about them. There are certainly a lot of comic book reviewers out there that I've seen that are clearly wanting a place at the table. They're wanting to say nice things about Marvel, nice things about DC, so they can get an opportunity potentially maybe on an editorial staff, maybe as an intern, maybe as a writer in the future. That has certainly worked for a lot of creators. Some of you may not know this, but Donny Cates, I believe, started working out at Bleeding Cool as it means to kind of get into the industry. So there are different types of comic book reviewers. Me personally, I try to be as honest as possible. And I have a few other friends on the channel that come on here, and I believe that they are the same like mine, and that's why I appreciate their opinions. Josh McDonald, who used to write a lot of reviews for BatmanNews.com. He's not really so much a reviewer there anymore. That's just pretty recently. He's kind of focused on his popbyculture.com website right now. And then Gabe Hernandez, who's over at Weird Science DC, as well as Comical Opinions, which is more independent stuff. And apparently, Gabe got himself in some hot water. This is what Stephanie Phillips had to say. Apparently, writing a negative review is gatekeeping. We'll get to that, but here's the very first tweet that Stephanie Phillips said. From a review for Harley Quinn number 12, Harley Quinn 12 is a middle finger from the creators to the readers in every way that matters. That was the quote from Gabe's review. Harsh reviews are fine. They come with the territory, but when a reviewer crosses the line into personal attacks, I'm going to speak up. Obviously, I mentioned this is Gabe Hernandez. This is his review of Harley Quinn number 12 from Weird Science. You'll remember Doc and I reviewed that comic book issue as well in Worst of the Week because we also didn't think it was very good. Now, I didn't go quite as far as saying that it was a middle finger to any reader that actually got the book, but I can see where he was coming from. If you took Harley Quinn out of that comic book, the events would all happen the exact same way. Even the opening, like, big action scene where Kevin's on the tracks and he's going to get hit by the train, she never removes the bomb. The bomb still blows up. He just doesn't die. Harley Quinn absolutely does nothing. So I can absolutely see where Gabe's coming from. To say that criticism, even that line, Harley Quinn 12 is a middle finger from the creators to the readers in every way that matters, is a personal attack. I don't see that. That feels like an analogy to me. It's not a nice analogy. I'm not going to say this, but it didn't say Harley Quinn 12 is evidence that Stephanie Phillips is the worst Harley Quinn writer in the history of the world and should be expelled from DC Comics, or Stephanie Phillips must eat a bag of shrooms before she writes these awful stories, maybe insinuating that she was a drug user. None of that happens there. There's an analogy. It's not all that nice. But you wrote a story about Harley Quinn where Harley Quinn didn't matter. People bought the story. They paid their hard-earned money to read a Harley Quinn story, and you didn't deliver that. So I can understand where Gabe would come up with that analogy. But I do like having him on the channel. And there's a reason, because he is very passionate about comic books. He takes it very seriously. He takes his opportunity to speak to the customers and give his reviews. He takes them very seriously. He's not going to sit there and sugarcoat something that sucks. And that's just who he is. I like that he's a straight shooter. And he has certainly been, right here on the channel, honest about his appraisal of DC and Marvel at this current state, that it's not very good, and that most of the quality happening in comic books are happening on the independent scene. Stephanie continues on the tweet. If you don't like the series, perfectly fine. Maybe it's not for you, but don't presume that I or the rest of the creative team didn't put every ounce of effort into our work. It's presumptuous, it's offensive, and it's absolutely wrong. It wasn't really a personal attack, and he never actually insinuates that you didn't put any effort into it. He's saying that the story that you ended up delivering didn't deliver the promise of what you'd set up beforehand, and I would agree with it. And that first line really stinks to the, if you don't like the comic book, just don't review it. If you are a comic book reviewer and you take it seriously and you feel like your reviews are a public service and you want people to see comic books, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent or whatever, you don't just skip out on the bad stuff and only concentrate on the good stuff. Unless you're some type of shill site and the only purpose of you doing these comic book reviews is to get a place at the table at DC or Marvel or perhaps one of the bigger sites and kind of jump your way in there, or maybe an Image or something like that. You have to be honest on every comic book that you review. And to put words or malice onto the part of Gabe just in that review where he never said anything presumptuous, offensive, or absolutely wrong about it. Those are opinions. You can take them or leave them. Stephanie Phillips herself in the very first tweet says harsh reviews are fine, but it's clearly not, because she continues. It seems like this kind of thing happens a lot. I even addressed it a few months ago. I thought then, and I think now, that we need to hold people accountable for crossing lines. Words matter, and this should not be an acceptable way to behave. How are you going to hold a comic book reviewer accountable for having an opinion that your comic book wasn't very good and the way that you delivered your story felt like a middle finger to comic book readers? How do you think Stephanie Phillips plans on holding Gabe Hernandez accountable? Probably get fired, maybe disparage him on the internet. Maybe we can see if we can go get some people to yell at. I imagine it's the first. Perhaps we'll just punish Weird Science, the review site, until they get rid of him altogether. That kind of feels like gatekeeping, like you want to keep him out of the comic review business, which I think is ridiculous. A vast, overwhelming majority of people that work for those websites that are actually putting out reviews, the vast majority of them are doing it for free out of love for the comic book industry. Some of them do get paid maybe $5, $10 max per review. And even in those cases, a lot of times they have to buy the comic books themselves. There's not a lot of money to be made in the comic book review game because the industry isn't that big. It doesn't draw in enough eyeballs. And that's too bad, because there are some really good comic book review sites and some people that I would definitely recommend. Weird Science is one of them, because I do feel like they're the most honest review site that kind of reviews everything. And Comical Opinions is kind of, I don't know, is it a sister website? It's like the independent comic book associate to that. I think Batman News are pretty, for the most part, fair with their reviews. If it's good, you're likely to see a good score. If it's bad, it's likely to be a bad score. Now, I certainly have disagreed with the reviewers in the past, but I do feel like they're giving you an honest opinion. Shockingly, another place that you can get a pretty damn good, reliable comic book review is Bleeding Cool. There's a guy named there. His name's Hannibal Taboo. I think I've talked about it once here on the channel. That dude is a very fair comic book reviewer. And shockingly, there's a couple of people over at comicbook.com that are actually willing to give a negative review here and there when the comic book absolutely warrants. But other than that, it's almost all shill sites. Stephanie does continue. I don't know why this reviewer has an axe to grind, and I don't want to drive traffic to their site. They have me blocked for unknown reasons since I have never interacted with them, which frankly seems like a good indication that the review is not solely about the work. Now, I did talk to Gabe about this. I said, do you have an axe to grind with Stephanie Phillips? He said, no, I noticed that Stephanie blocked me like a year ago, and I guess he has a block back policy, maybe. So that he didn't even know that this stuff was about him. He saw the tweets from Josh and didn't even know that they were talking about his review, because this is a couple weeks old. It's not like this is a new comic book. Now let's look at Gabe's track record as far as a comic book reviewer and see if maybe Gabe's just overly harsh in his criticisms. As you can see, Gabe Hernandez is not somebody that just willy-nilly hands out a green score. Most of the stuff is in the yellow. We get a couple in the green and a few in the red, which makes sense if you talk to Gabe, and he said it on the channel. He does not think that Marvel and DC are a good place right now and aren't releasing a lot of good comic books. So these are all the big two comic books. And you can see here's Harley Quinn number 12 as a 1. That is an outlier. He does not review very many comics as a 1. I know he didn't like One Star Squad either. So it really tells you how much he doesn't like this one. But I also know that he thinks Tom King's a bad writer, and Tom King got a 9 for Killing Time, got a 7.5 for Human Target. As we move down to this spot, in October, November of 2021, he thought that this was a pretty good time for DC and Marvel, who were giving some pretty decent scores out there. And you'll see right here, Harley Quinn, number 8, with an 8 out of 10, which is a very high score for Gabe. I wonder who wrote that comic book. Could it have been Stephanie Phillips? It doesn't feel like somebody that has an axe to grind. But he gave her comic book a pretty high score. Robin and Batman was a phenomenal comic book. Swamp Thing, which I know he hasn't really liked a whole lot, gave that one a high score. Obviously felt like that was an outlier. Aquaman the Becoming, Newbie the Amazon's number 2. He even gave that comic book a high review. So it feels like, for the most part, he's pretty consistent across the board. And you can see in his mind, based on his reviews and their scores, they are trending down. We can go over here to the Comical Opinions, Gabe Hernandez reviews, and these are going to be his independents. And it basically bears out exactly what he said. He feels like the independent comics are where it's at right now. He's having a much better time reading a lot of the indie comics right now. Is Gabe a harsh reviewer? He's an honest reviewer, and it's very difficult to get a high score. But he's absolutely willing to give one, including to Stephanie Phillips, when he feels like it's warranted. This final tweet is the one that really doesn't make sense to me. There's a lot of hypocrisy going on in this one. Stephanie says, I wouldn't do the job if I didn't love it. Reviewers have every right to dislike something, but I think personal attacks constitute an attempt at gatekeeping, which should absolutely not be the role of reviews. We have enough internet trolls. First of all, you were literally trying to get Gabe, or threatening to get Gabe removed for Weird Science, or Weird Science removed as a review site because you didn't like his opinion. Is that not gatekeeping? Am I right? What do you think Gabe needs to be held accountable for his words? His words are violence means. I know what it means because I've been living this for the last 5 years. You are the one that's actually gatekeeping. There's never a mention within any of Gabe's reviews that I saw, and I could go back and check out quite a few of your comic books, where he said you need to be fired, that DC Comics made a mistake by hiring you. He's only criticized your work. He's never actually called for you to be removed or for anyone not to read your comic book. He's just giving an honest review, and people, they can lend it credence or they can not lend it credence. That's what the review was there for. So people can make an informed decision before they go out there and spend $4 on 24 pages of entertainment. But to say that Gabe is gatekeeping you because he used an analogy of you giving readers a middle finger because you didn't deliver on the promise of what you had started in the previous issue is insane, when you yourself have already said that he should be held accountable for his words. He's already held you accountable for your work. He said it wasn't very good. He said it sucked. And if anyone trusts his opinion on comic books, they shouldn't buy it. They should probably wait or go back to Harley Quinn number 8, which he said was good. That's okay. But to say that he's gatekeeping when he has no responsibilities at DC Comics, he has no input at DC Comics, he has no input into the hiring practices, and he certainly has no control over the wallet or the spending habits of anybody that reads the review. They come there, they get the information, and they make an informed choice. There are other reviews out there that claim that Harley Quinn number 12 was good. I say, if you think that comic book is good, you're full of shit, and you're lying to yourself, because I think it also sucks. And if you want some proof, Doc and I already talked about that comic book and how bad it was when we talked about Rockstar and Softboy and Harley Quinn number 12. If you want the proof, it's halfway through the video. You might want to skip the Rockstar and Softboy stuff because that comic book was way worse. It sucked.